Thank you, Emma, and thank you for joining us for this panel called Supporting Exhausted Teams. My name is Ronnie Mitra. I'll be your host today. If you've been attending sessions at CTO Craft today, you know the theme is stress and burnout and this idea of exhaustion. I think we've all been there, right? It's something we can all relate to. There's this force inside of us that gets us to wake up in the morning and open Outlook or Gmail or whatever. And when that thing is gone, things get really hard. So you've heard a lot of practical advice today, but really with this panel, we want to focus on a few leaders who are living this and solving this every single day, not just for themselves, but for their teams. So we're really excited to be getting points of view from some very senior technology leaders. We've got Jessica Gilbert from OpenSignal, Jules Coleman from Resi, Madeleine Evans she's both from Level and Walbrook, and Vicky Wills from Zego. So thank you, all of you, for joining us. We're going to get to the, how do you help teams? But I can't help myself. I need to ask the question. It's almost like a level 0 question. This whole panel starts with the premise that there's something we need to fix, right? So Jessica, I'm gonna go to you, and what I want to know is, burnout is not something new. We're always tired. Everyone's fatigued. In your work, is burnout actually something that needs to be addressed, or is this just part of business and it's fine?
Well, I guess I've been lucky enough to work for about the last 5 years for companies that had great company cultures that take like health and well-being seriously. And that was really important to me because it enabled me to be the kind of leader that I wanted to be. However, even with the best sort of health and wellness programs internally, I mean, burnout is still a problem for my business, and I'd love to hear from anyone who thinks it's not a problem for theirs. As for why it's a problem that we need to solve, if we look at the 3 different dimensions of burnout, feeling of exhaustion, feeling of cynicism and negativity towards the job, feeling of ineffective at the job, and then we counter that and we look at how we describe highly performing teams. Like, this is not a description of highly performing teams at all, right? I know that when I was interviewing last year, one of the most important things that I was looking for in my next role was a company with an amazing company culture. And I know that from the candidates that I've been interviewing, over the past year, it's a top question that comes up in every interview. So when we look at things like the Great Resignation and the root cause of a huge amount of why people are, looking for work, people are reprioritizing their life and what's important to them. So I guess really, to sum it up, it seems that if we want to hire and retain top talent and maintain highly performant teams, you absolutely need to build a workplace with a good company culture that recognizes burnout and tries to provide people with a healthy working environment.
Okay. It makes sense. So
there's my summary.
if people are not happy, we can't keep them. If we don't offer them a work environment, and it's a competition now, right? It's a heated competition to find the best people. So obviously there is a reason to address this.
I think so,
if we're saying that the kind of root cause here is exhaustion, Vicky, I'll go to you with this. What causes that? What's the real root problem here? Is it overwork, or is it type of work?
I would definitely argue that there's a combination of the two. Actually, I think when you think of burnout, it's very easy to sort of go straight to, oh, it must be the workload. Somebody's taking on too much. They're working too much. They've burnt out. They've run out of energy. So therefore they must have done too much. But I really believe that the type of work makes such a difference as well. And I've been really lucky at Zego to be able to take on quite a wide range of teams across engineering and data. So I've seen quite a lot of different types of roles across the technology space. And the one thing that I've observed is that there is no one size fits all to teams, and on an individual basis, a role that might give somebody a lot of energy would be somebody else's worst nightmare. And I think burnout for me is quite related to how much energy do you get from the type of work you do, because it is possible to work incredibly hard and not get burnt out if you're really enjoying what you're doing, you're really engaged by your work, and it gives you energy. And I think it's all about for people self-managing and also for managers to identify what are the things that give you energy and what are the things that take them away. And for me, burnout is about managing that level. And if you're lucky to have an organization with quite a broad range of roles in technology, as managers, we do have the opportunity to maybe move people around, find the best fit for them. I really love Jessica's point around burnout is not how you describe a high performing team. And I think for all of us, we're building teams, we're building systems, we're building technologies. We need high performing teams to do so. A lot of us, we're up against it, whether we're building startups or sort of bigger companies. Like we're always, it's the cliche, right? You'll never get as much as you want to get done. Like we're always under resourced, we're always running out of time. So you need high performing teams for your company to succeed. So one of the most powerful things I think in this is making sure people are in the roles that give them energy. And also obviously managing their workload. You can't get away from the fact that there are only so many hours in a day. And as Jessica said, people are balancing their lives as well. And we need to be really aware of that, I think, as leaders, and make sure people have that balance, but also your work should give you energy. We all work in creative disciplines. We all love it. We all want to build things. So making sure that you give your teams that environment and the individuals that the work that they really want to do.
Can I check, Vicky? So is the premise there, if I like my job, then I might be working 10, 12 hours a day, but that might be okay? Like I'm not going to get burned out if what I'm doing is something I'm passionate about. It's just going to give me energy instead of draining energy.
To an extent, yes. I don't think, personally, I don't think it's sustainable for anybody to work 12-hour days indefinitely. I think there is a limit to how much energy we have as human beings. Life happens as well. So I think if you're planning on doing that for years on end, there's probably questions we need to ask. But my point is that there are stints you can go through that you might work 12-hour days, but that if you're really getting energy from what you're doing, then you can burn out on 4-hour days if it's really draining your energy. So I don't think it's a straight correlation between the hours worked in that sense.
Yeah, I'm just going to pull on this thread a bit. Madeleine, I want to go to you because I know you and I have talked before, and you've mentioned that even if you like what you're doing, there's this risk, there's a danger there, right, from a burnout perspective.
Yeah, I think Vicky said it perfectly, actually, which is these are almost separate dimensions. And it goes back to what Jessica had said about being exhaustion, being one dimension of burnout as the kind of academic diagnosis, and cynicism or negativity towards job being another dimension, which is often that bit is what leads to disengagement. And so the values alignment piece, which is often what is underlying what people kind of say, job's really motivating, it gives me energy, it's aligned with my values, right? It's aligned with my goals, is really, really important to drive motivation. And it certainly prevents you from becoming cynical or feeling frustrated with the work that you're doing. But it is also possible there are so many hours in a day, just as Vicky said, and sometimes we don't necessarily take into account where we actually sit in terms of our own physical capacity and how much we actually have been working. And it's possible to sort of be so motivated that we can put ourselves beyond the brink of what's actually we should be doing because it's so interesting and we just want to get that last, solve that last problem or write that last line. And we need to treat these as different dimensions and almost manage them differently, actually, whether we're self-managing or in teams.
Okay, so it makes sense. So sometimes it's almost like saving people from themselves. They can exhibit that kind of happiness, but there's a longer term impact. Jules, let's go to you. I mean, we've explored a little bit whether it's a problem, kind of definition. Let's move on to solution. I mean, what are you doing in your work and with your teams to help prevent things like burnout?
Sure. I mean, I think first and foremost, I try to lead by example. I'm not immune to the kind of, the phenomenon of burnout or kind of the risk factors kind of involved. I think, agreeing with everything the guys have said already, I think in our industry, we tend to have, there's a lot of people that are very passionate about what they do. They tend to be quite driven and motivated, and sometimes they can, I think, expend more energy maybe than they mean to or should, or at least at an unsustainable rate. And I think everything that's, gone on in the last 18 months in terms of all the upheaval kind of in our lives has meant that for some, myself included, those boundaries between work and non-work have really been blurred, and people that are maybe prone to kind of working unsustainable levels have maybe kind of had the opportunity to do that even more so. So some of the practical things that I try and do, and I don't always succeed, but keep going, is taking my holidays, and when I take my vacation time, I am off the grid. Like, I have, here's a WhatsApp number. If something, if somebody's dropped like the production database, you can call me. But other than that, I'll be back in 2 weeks. And really taking that time, thinking that, it's, you need those breaks from work to kind of, recharge, re-energize, and come back and kind of do really high performing kind of like good work later on. When you're not on vacation, I think respecting the working day for yourself and for others is super important. Slack has scheduled messages. There's no need to send people Slacks at outside of working hours. You can kind of, respect those times. You don't need to, don't praise people that are going above and beyond by doing something on the weekend or pulling like an all-nighter. There's can be crunch times in kind of business, but it can be fetishized way too much, I think. And you can turn, a really great engineer, that has this period of, immense productivity into someone that then burnt out and is, can't kind of perform at that level for a much longer period of time. And, it's, again, then part of the one-to-one conversations having with my team and really encouraging them to have with theirs is, watching for those unsustainable behaviors. And for people that maybe have never experienced burnout before, saying it's the kind of thing that can sneak up on you. You're not burnt out, and then suddenly you're burnt out, and then it doesn't go away again over a weekend. So, it's, I don't think there's any magic bullet. I think, having fulfilling work, that you really believe in and working in a sustainable way are two ways to mitigate the risk. But with everything that's going on, in the wider context, we're definitely in a heightened period of being susceptible, I think, to this phenomenon.
So you kind of touched on this idea that it can creep up on you, right? You can think, I'm doing my job, I'm engaged, I'm doing some work, and suddenly I hit a wall. Madeleine, I want to ask you, how can you tell? How can you tell when burnout is an issue or is potentially an issue? How do we know when it's coming, especially when we think about managing teams of teams? I think you might be on mute.
Nice one, thanks. Really interesting and challenging question for sure, especially when we talk about teams of teams, because I don't think that there isn't actually good data infrastructure embedded in most companies to support leadership in that. Something that I have tried to tackle with Level. I would say it has to start on the individual basis, right? And it's about self-awareness. What I like to personally look at, and this is part of my own recovery from having experienced burnout that definitely crept up on me and then definitely wasn't just fixable right away, is I like to look at 4 things which are loosely mapped to burnout and engagement, which you effectively want to be engaged but not burnt out, right? But a lot of us are in that kind of highly engaged but highly exhausted state. So 4 signals, I like to look at mood. So basically, am I happy, positive, right? Do I have motivation for my job? Do I feel a drive? But do I also feel energized rather than exhausted? And do I feel calm rather than stressed? And I think of that as kind of peak performance state effectively. That if you're in that on a day-to-day basis, you're probably pretty good. If you start to see your energy levels slipping, if you're not getting enough recovery overnight, you're waking up tired, that, according to research, is actually a pretty important sign because it builds up cumulatively over time effectively. And the other thing you want to watch out for is feelings of chronic stress. So obviously stress or strain and then relaxation and recovery. That's fine. That helps lead to growth. When you have unrelenting periods of stress where you constantly feel under pressure, you're starting to get really wound up, you're starting to feel really myopic, you're not able to take good decisions, lacking creativity, perhaps lashing out at people. And by the way, these are things that like people in your local environment can also see as well. Those are really good signs that you're actually under chronic stress at the moment. And it could be because of your job, it could be for something else. And you're going to need to address the root cause of that in order to ameliorate the risk that you would otherwise probably burn out if that continues. And that's kind of the first step. And then I think we need to think really strategically and creatively about how we can start to make some of these really subtle aspects of our emotional, physical state a little bit more measurable and something that feels confidently shareable amongst teams and amongst companies. And that could be verbally, that could be through surveys, that could be other data platforms and tools. There's a much broader project going on at the level of supranational organizations, the OECD, the World Economic Forum, to think about alternative measures to GDP. And a hypothesis is that we could look at well-being. And, I'd asked myself the question, I'd asked the audience the question, why is that not something that we also look at as KPIs for our companies, teams, and for ourselves?
Right. So there's potentially a quantifiable measure that would give you observability, that would enable you to start to see things before they happen so you could take action and be preemptive. What I also heard you kind of touch on is maybe there's intrinsic things and there's also external, like observable things, like the way people make. Yeah. So does that become also in education exercise within in the same way we talk about mental health? These have to be things that people know when they see these behaviors. It's a flag. Is that the idea?
I would definitely hope so. Certainly for the point that Jules mentioned, that people who've never experienced burnout before might not be aware. And also, we're often not able to see ourselves, especially in later stages of burnout when we've been under stress for quite a long time. We're not able to see that our behaviors change, that we're snapping at people. We might be denying sometimes how we're feeling. Things like self-reflecting regularly can help bring that change to the fore, but also having other people reflect that back to us can be quite helpful in a very respectful and supportive way.
Okay, makes sense. Vicky, I'll pick on you for a second. You're a CTO. You've done engineering work, data work, heavily technical work. Classically, culturally in technology, we have this idea that gets done with late nights, right? That gets done with like kind of a hero culture. In your day-to-day work, do you exhibit that personally, and then you expect your people not to get burned out, or do you feel like a role in also demonstrating that, look, I don't have to stay up all night to get things done?
I really hope I don't exhibit that to the teams. It's something that I try very hard to role model the behaviors as well, things like not sending messages out of hours, and actually being strict about that. It's one thing to actually work all hours and schedule your messages to arrive at 8 a.m. the following morning. It's another thing to actually live by the values and give yourself a break. So as far as possible, I do try to sort of keep my weekends clear of work. I do try to have evenings. Obviously, there's always things in startups that can come up, and sometimes you are in a crunch period and you do have to work those extra hours. But I think it is important to role model it. I think I really relate to what Madeleine was saying there, where people might not be aware, and sort of helping people to recognize that and not seeing it as a failure. I think sometimes if people get burnt out and they're not really aware of what that means or what it is, and they've got all these sort of feelings and they're trying to pin it on something. I know I've been there. You're trying desperately in the environment to be like, why do I feel like this? And something must be wrong, and I must find the thing to blame it on her. And you start all those behaviors that Madeleine was talking about. And I think if it is a fine line when you're talking to people who are in that state, because they don't. It feels like a failure to sort of put it back onto yourself and say, I'm burnt out. So I think having those conversations really sensitively is important as well. And another point actually that you touched on, Madeleine, was the personal side of things as well, because somebody might be going great guns in a job, for a long time. You might see somebody really are performing for over a year. Their workload's really manageable, and they're really enjoying what they're doing, really high performer. But we don't have the full picture. Something might happen at home, something might happen in their personal life, and I think we have to be aware that we don't have the full picture of people. So having those conversations sensitively. So that's what I always try and make sure we've got that culture of the team of sort of openness, transparency, safe spaces for people to talk and be really listened to, as well, because you can't solve all the problems. Sometimes people are in a state where, as you said, Ronnie, before, like there's no sort of quick fix for some of these things. And sometimes just being listened to, like really listened to, and having a space to explore those feelings can be really powerful for teams, as well. I've deviated from your question a bit there, Ronnie, but I think it is really important to role model it, as leaders. And the late night thing about the sort of hero complex, I really think it's so damaging for the industry that's an image that we associate, with these types of roles. It's not good for the individuals. If you're working all those hours and you're tired and you're stressed, you're not going to do good work. You might get the work done somehow, but it's a creative endeavor. It's a very consuming thing, are all these technical disciplines, and you need to be well rested and you need to be in a good state yourself. I'll also say it's terrible for diversity in the industry. It's terrible for parents, for people from diverse backgrounds, because people might have life situations that means that they can't live to that stereotype. And if we put that on a pedestal and make that the image of our industry, we're really limiting ourselves. So I'm very against it as something that I would ever champion in the team.
Jessica, would you agree generally? This is,
Yeah, I mean, I'm intrigued because I feel like, as I've come up through my career, it was definitely, the cultures were definitely more aligned to that in, the earlier days. And so I'm intrigued as to whether actually the industry's changed and we've moved more away from that, or whether I've just picked companies differently. So I think that's interesting. But I think, through listening to some of the other talks today and people, talking right now, I think one of the key words to all of this is sustainability, right? And we're all trying to build sustainable lives, and we're all trying to balance what's important in order to be able to consistently deliver. And so we need to make sure that what we're doing is sustainable. And so I think, to the point earlier, you can't just continue to, work 12, 14-hour days and kind of stick to it. And I think it's important for us as leaders to not encourage a hero culture. And if anything, I mean, there's always going to be times where you have to push. We all support production platforms, stuff goes wrong. There will always be a need for people to, this isn't a 9-to-5 job, but as leaders, it's important that we are, recognizing that and ensuring that people are taking time and leave, or we are finding ways to compensate people when they are having to go above and beyond, and ensure that, time is precious, and that we are encouraging people to rest and take time back when they have gone above and beyond.
So you kind of touched on almost these cultural aspects. There's systematic constraints, controls, and really as leaders, this is kind of your job, right? You create a culture, you shift a culture by putting those things in place. Jules, I want to ask you, what do you expect from the people in your organization? Like what's their responsibility? The person on the ground doing the work, what's their responsibility to prevent burnout beyond just the systematic things we put in place?
Sure. I mean, look, I hire hopefully high-performing, successful grown-ups. I'm not their mother, and I don't want to kind of play this parental role and remove them of autonomy and kind of responsibility in this area, And I will often say to people, I'm not forbidding you from doing anything, but here's what I'm doing, and here's how I'm approaching things, and here's some of the experiences I've had in the past. You'll live your own life. You'll have your own experiences, and need to get there. So people definitely need to take their own personal responsibility and work out what's right for them. I think all you can kind of do is, you say, like, create a culture, create workflows and, team kind of dynamics that don't support the excesses, don't kind of, try and kind of lure people into that. And then hopefully, share experiences, have, I would say, create safe spaces, not making taboo of like any of these kind of things. When some people in my team have had taken time off for burnout, we don't sugarcoat over it and kind of like, oh, it was like something else. It's like, it's a real thing, assuming the person's like willing to kind of, speak about it themselves. And I think that's like really important because, there's definitely, young engineers who, and this probably would have definitely been me in my early 20s. Like, you look ahead and you're like, oh yeah, that won't be me though. That's just people that have like, not done it right. Something if they burn out, I'm going to keep like burning the midnight oil. I'll be fine. And I think like showing them that it's real, like, and it's, it can affect kind of anyone, and it may well affect them if they kind of, keep going with that. And it's counterproductive. It's that false economy of, if I just work really, really hard right now, I'm going to get this massive payoff and go rest on the beach for the rest of my life. And I do think that's actually one of the dynamics of burnout. We've all talked now about like those periods of, push and kind of, where we need to put in extra effort. And I think a lot of burnout is when you do that, obviously for an extended period of time, with the idea that I'm just going to push through and then I'll get to rest. And when the rest doesn't come, like that can be when, like these kind of periods happen, and you realize you still got to go and do the job. You still got to turn up every week. There's still kind of things like happening. So I think people definitely need to take personal responsibility, but you need to kind of foster the right culture where, that is rewarded and not, not seen as a weakness or seen as a reason that you wouldn't get promoted or any of kind of those things.
And Jessica, you had a follow-up on that?
Yeah, I mean, I just kind of wanted to reiterate Jules's point. And as much as, as employers, we can't take responsibility for an individual's mental or physical health, but what we can do is give them support to enable them to do it themselves. And so, whether that's, learning budgets or benefits or time, or most importantly, just permission, really. We can help them with a problem, but we can't own the problem. I think, there's another point that I guess we've all been touching on, and I think there's maybe two different types of burnout, in as much as we can look at individual burnout, where we have one person in a team that's burnt out and we can work with them, individually to help them get the support they need to hopefully turn it around. And then you've got team burnout, where actually, potentially you have an organizational problem and you maybe need to look at changing your organizational culture. So I guess that you would deal with both of those things slightly differently.
Okay, makes sense. Madeleine, anything to
add? Yeah, I think it was just an important point to build on that idea that companies can't necessarily take responsibility for an individual's own health, because health is holistic, right? Kind of biopsychosocial. There are social determinants, there are personal determinants of your own health, but companies can definitely take responsibility for, or at least take responsibility for their share in the negotiation around the workplace factors that do influence that person's physical, mental, and emotional health. So on top of, I think, I just want to build on the permission piece. It's really important that kind of companies, in terms of the way they state, what they state about their culture, individual line managers, leaders, ensure that employees feel empowered and also see role modeled and also get good feedback when it happens. The idea of employee voice, that there's an opportunity to share what you need in order to be your most productive, and an opportunity to communicate when you feel like things are building up. And it could be that things are building up on workload, or it could be things are building up on frustrations. We kind of call them daily hassles in the academic speak, or values misalignments, or issues of unfairness that can really eat away at you, right? And you might not feel that you have the forum. And so I do think it is companies' responsibility to say that they value it, provide proactive outreach to understand and create fora where employee can contribute their voices, and show positive feedback when it happens to complete that loop. And I think if you pair that with the active support for people's own individual activities in their own life, that can be really powerful.
All right, fantastic. Let's take some of the questions. We've got a few here. There's one from Vaughn Dixon. that I think really touches on, people's experience. As much as we talk about this, people's experience is often that, yeah, but in the real world, here's what's happening to me, right? So Von Dixon asks, how do you convince non-tech managers that software development is a creative endeavor and not a Taylorist widget factory? So, Vicky, we haven't heard from you in a few minutes. Why don't you take a stab at that?
Oh, this is an absolutely huge question. It is the $1 million question for me, in some respects. I think there's a little bit of chicken and egg here for me, because I think if you gain enough trust to show non-tech managers that if you give the team the space, they're going to give you an incredible creative solution rather than dictating exactly what you want and how you want it to them. Obviously, to get to that point, you have to have built some trust. So the way that I would sort of approach this is that it's a dial, right? You've got to build it up over time. So get the trust in delivery and then start to create the space for that creative endeavor. Obviously, if technology is at the heart of your company, you would hope that the company has an understanding and gives the team that space for it to be a creative endeavor. I like to use analogies when I'm explaining how tech works. I think unless you do have direct experience with technology, it's quite difficult to understand exactly what it is and how it works. So I think sort of creating parallels. I find music quite useful. So you can describe like the mechanics of playing the piano and somebody playing beautifully are different things. You can sort of use the conductor and orchestra analogy as well. So trying to find ways to explain it that sort of pull it away from coding as how many tickets did you get done this sprint can be useful as well. But I don't have a this is how you do it for that question. I think it's a lot of communication, and it's a lot of just keeping the message and showing, like, make sure you shine a spotlight on it when you do have a really creative solution from the team that wouldn't have been achieved with that widget factory that you're talking about. It's a great question. I love it.
Any top tips from the rest of the panel here on this one?
I'm just glad I didn't have to answer it. I mean, wasn't Agile born out of this problem?
Yeah. Jules has raised her hand. Let's hear.
Yeah. I mean, I've raised my hand, but maybe no top tips. I guess just maybe on the counterpoint, just one thing that I've definitely found is you don't want to lean too heavily into engineers are super special creatures like that, must not be disturbed in their natural habitat, because it can definitely create resentment within a company that has other disciplines as well. We're like, oh no, we're special, we need to be kind of like left alone and do things. So whilst I think there's a lot of, I work in an architectural practice, right? That's like actually what we mainly are, and there's a lot of similarities between like what architects are doing with designing a house and what our engineers are doing designing software. And so, one of the things we want is not to put tech up onto some pedestal, but to talk, more about these creative disciplines, and that it is more about the outcomes, and what you actually achieve and kind of, the problems that you've solved and kind of, the impact that they've had rather than the volume of them. And I think, being in an organization that isn't being super metric driven, like, it's like lines of code written or something god awful, like, would just be like the opposite end of the spectrum to that. I think having that, but making sure that we don't kind of, make ourselves so special that it feels like defensive, I think, because that can really stymie the conversation in companies.
And Madeleine, you must have run into this in your work as well.
I hope I can add to this because I'm the business counterpart to the technology leader and have worked in companies where the scoping was really detailed, and I was kind of product managing that process and had to learn this one, I think, a little bit the hard way. I found it really useful to have my technology leader counterpart to talk me through, what are the business goals, right? What are you trying to achieve? And then think of us as your partner in that process. So if you can articulate the broader business outcomes, we can help you kind of design the boat or build the house or whatever it is that's going to get us there. But what you need to do is focus on the outcomes and how you're going to know if it's good in terms of impact and also any constraints. And then you need to let us go away and kind of solve that problem and come up with ideas and think about that with you. I found it really helpful to hear about technology from the perspective of problem solving, which I found easy to grasp and realize that needs time to go away and think about and come back with new ideas, with being given the confidence that I could then still kind of input on those ideas to make sure that criteria. And that allowed us to develop a good working relationship. But obviously that does require whoever is the technology leader in the firm to be having that conversation with the product leader or business leader.
So there's like I think across all, there's an underlying theme of empathy that's required here, right? For all parties involved, so we can kind of figure this out. There's a really good question from Andy Skipper here. Following on from a point from Joe Carter, what provisions can we make for a neurodiverse team members who are more prone to burning out? So this kind of challenges, we're talking about, okay, we're going to prevent burnout, but you might have some people in the team they're just more prone to running out of energy, and they have a different working pattern perhaps. Anyone want to take a stab at this? Have you experienced this in your work? Do you have people like this, and how are you helping them? Jessica, I'll turn to you.
Well, I mean, I guess one size doesn't fit all ever. And so I think really it is just building close working relationships, building trust, and having an open and transparent relationship where you really can understand each other. And I think to some of the points earlier, you don't establish whether someone's burnt out or not by asking them if they're burnt out. You have to observe them, because they won't necessarily recognize the signs of burnout. And, it's important that us as leaders do. And so, sustainability, it goes back to sustainability again. We need to make sure that we're creating things that work for individuals that then come together and work as a team. We don't try and apply a one size fits all across the team. And it's quite a generalized answer, but I think the key is individualization and understanding what individuals need in order to kind of nurture a team.
Fantastic. There's a topic that we haven't talked about, and I just wanted to see if anyone would ask about it. I think it's been talked about to death, and that's the situation we are in and potentially emerging from, right? So everyone's at home. The nature of how we work has kind of changed. There's less face-to-face. Madeleine, I'm going to start with you with this question. Is this, where we are now has obviously changed the mental load on people. So there's an impact from that. Do you think this is a temporary thing? So if we go back to the way things were, the before times, does burnout and fatigue and stress just kind of become less of a problem because we'll be back to that old way of working? And this is really symptomatic of, the whole COVID situation.
I love this question. I think everyone is going to have their views on it as well. If I could slightly go off piste and make a quick point on the neurodiverse angle, I think we should be really careful about the idea that individuals are specifically weaker, prone to burnout or something like that. There are certain patterns that research says is correlated. Perfectionism, just because it means you're taking on more demands and enlarging demands for yourself often, quite frequently. And then also negative rumination, which is when a negative event happens, you think about it a lot and you basically create the event in a lot larger in your mind. But those are probably, to some extent, catastrophic thinking as well. Probably the only areas of what might be classified as neurodiversity that would potentially make someone more prone to burnout because they kind of over-egg the demands. And those are also things that also can be addressed as well by individuals. So just wanted to make that point. On the, I guess the question is a little bit around remote working and the connection to burnout and also COVID. I think what's been super interesting, and this is also from the perspective of me of working with a number of different companies and seeing their different experiences, is that we have had as a this is like one of the greatest experiments, right? What happens when you allow millions of people all of a sudden to start to choose where they work, and are seeing, on one hand, a lot of eagerness to get back to the office, on the other hand, a lot of resistance to go back to the office. And that has to really do with individuals' preferred ways of working. Some people find that not having to go into the office means they don't have the commute and they get a lot more done. Some people find that it's really chaotic at home, and so they want to go into the office so they can get the space, and they also really thrive off that social interaction. So I don't think we can draw a one-size-fits-all conclusion. I think the big benefit is that COVID, lockdown, and now the move to more hybrid ways of working has opened up a really important conversation about how we craft our jobs on a day-to-day basis so that we can be our most effective, while also working effectively with other people in our teams to achieve our company goals. And I just, I don't think we've yet seen that all play out yet, but I'll let others give their own experiences.
Jules, go ahead.
Yeah, I think I've got no crystal ball, but if I was a betting woman, we're not going back, right? I don't think we're ever going fully back. We can't transport ourselves back to 2019 when it's like, oh, what, the flu from 1917? That'll never happen again. Our company, I feel we're like anachronistic in some ways. We've gone back to 2 to 3 days in the week in the office. And that feels like we're an extreme, right? We used to be 5 days, no one bat an eyelid. Now we're like 2 days, and you're like, wow, back in the office, really? And I just don't see attending back to like a 5 day a week in the office. For us, the reason we did that, and it might change in the future, it's still, like you say, it's still an experiment, is that there's definitely a mixture within our teams of people that are the more classic introvert and really renew their energy stores by being alone and kind of having time to think, and others that are more extroverted, not like life and soul of the party necessarily, but just they get energy from interacting with others in a real physical space. And I think on one hand, if a company is totally open as to where you work, in some ways the optionality is actually being removed from the office workers or the people that enjoy that, because for most people, it's not the physical of like going to the building that's called the office. It's about being around your colleagues and getting to interact with them like in a personal basis. So if you go in there but everyone else is at home and you're just doing your Zoom call from your desk in the office, it's not really that much different to being kind of at home. And so for us, having that balance where we have 2 days, we do Tuesdays and Thursdays typically in the office, and pretty much everybody is in on those days. So you get that kind of sense, kind of like seeing people and working with people. And then you've got the other 3 days of the week where you kind of got more heads down, kind of, time, and you got that kind of, ability to recharge. Has worked for us to an extent, but we'll continue to kind of play with that and see what makes the most sense. But I just don't see us ever going fully back. I would be really, really surprised if, even a sizable percentage of knowledge workers are working 5 days a week in a physical office anytime soon.
And Jessica, that's your experience as well?
Yeah, I was just going to say that obviously COVID and the current situation has contributed to burnout and made it worse. But I was looking at a survey earlier on today, and I think it was a Deloitte survey, and even pre-pandemic, they were saying 77% of people were complaining about, experiencing burnout. So it's not really a new problem. We've just got better at talking about it. I think that a loss of connection and sense of belonging is definitely contributing to burnout. And so there are some elements of going back to the office that will help. But, on the flip side, this kind of always on culture is also, definitely contributing, and people are having to learn to put up their own boundaries. So, I don't think we'll be going back to the office 5 days a week. I know personally I don't want to. But that doesn't mean that there isn't benefits in the office and spending time together. I think we just need to look at what role the office plays in the work that we do, and use it as a tool the same way we do Slack or anything else.
Fantastic. I think we're just about out of time. What I'm taking away from this is really, first of all, we should be optimistic, right? We have 4 leaders here who see this as a real problem. We're hearing a lot of innovative ways to tackle it. And it's not just about, reducing people's workload, right? It's not a simple problem, and there's not a simple solution. But I think what we can all take away is there's a full set of tools. Some of them could be tech-based, some of them are people-based, some of them are organizational, and some of them are just about demonstrating values and demonstrating actions, right? And together with all of that, I think we're creating a better workplace, and I hope creating a better world ultimately. So thank you again, Jessica, Madeleine, Vicky, and Jules.